Welcome to BLLA. My name is Bob Sonnenblick, and this panel deals with the evolution of the boutique hotel, and I am really thrilled with the panel that we've got here next to me. When Fran said to me about come in and moderate a panel, I said to her I wanted to do something very unique that's never been done before, and I wanted to fill the panel with friends and business associates who are really the best in the industry at the things that they do. And specifically within the boutique business, what we thought we would try to accomplish here is really look at the boutique hotel from start to finish, from taking it from a site through feasibility, through design, through financing, through operations, and hear from the people that are doing it right now in the real world. So without further ado, let's kind of just jump into things. Maybe let's take a second and work our way across. Dan, why don't we start with you? Just each of you, take 30 seconds. Just give us a quick overview on who you are and what you do, and then we'll jump right into the panel itself.
I hate doing that.
Well, come on. Everybody's got to know.
Lesser LW Hospitality Advisors.
Dan is our feasibility and valuation expert here in the industry. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Gordon. I'm with a company called Tribeca Associates. We're a developer and acquirer of hotels and office and residential here in New York, and we have several projects which we'll talk about today.
Jason?
I'm Jason Pomeranc. I'm a founder and co-owner of a company called 60 Hotels. We recently formed this year, and previously I founded a company called Thompson Hotels, and we develop, own, and operate hotels, mostly in the boutique sector, nationally and internationally.
Carrie?
Hi, my name is Karrie Drinkhahn. I'm a principal with the Getty Group. We're a brand, interior design, and procurement firm for the hospitality industry, headquartered in Chicago, and I'm based in Miami.
John?
I'm John Bralower. I'm with the Carlton Group. We do investment banking, anything that has to do with capital, and I focus on hospitality. And you all have no idea how bright these lights are. You should all come up here.
Terrific. Well, with that as a background, let's just jump right into things. And if we're going through the evolution of a boutique hotel, let's start at the very basics. And that's kind of a discussion on location theory. And Mark, I'm going to start with you. You guys are in the middle of a fantastic boutique project here in Manhattan, the Baccarat Hotel project. As you're looking around, tell us, does a boutique hotel development have a different kind of location than what you would normally find on a major avenue? Can you be on a side street? Can a boutique work without being on the corner of 57th and Park Avenue? Tell us about location theory first to make one of these things.
Yeah, well, I think our location is actually better than Park on 57th. There's
Okay.
another hotel there. But all kidding aside, our project is a mixed-use building. So we have a boutique hotel, or a luxury boutique hotel, with 114 keys. As Bobby said, it's called the Baccarat Hotel. And then there's also a residential component above the hotel, which will be fully serviced by the luxury hotel. So we did think location was important for a project of this quality level, and we chose to build this on 5th Avenue and 53rd Street, right across from MoMA, which is arguably one of the most known locations within the city. So we did feel location was important, to answer your question.
Can you get away with being off of a hard corner as opposed to being directly on 5th Avenue, for example?
Sure. I think that the luxury guest seeks a specific experience, and many of these hotels are viewed as destination hotels. So I think a market like New York, which is not a very big market to begin with, allows developers and hotel owners some flexibility in terms of location, and it's really more a focus on quality of building, design, and service.
Jason, you guys are doing boutique hotels across the country. Great projects, for example, in Beverly Hills, here in New York, Miami, South Beach. Does a boutique hotel only work in the big powerhouse cities, in the top 5, 10, or does it have some depth to it?
It's very interesting. The sector certainly started in the global capitals, New York, Paris, London, and evolved from there. And it took probably one generation of product and the injection of a big brand of Starwood to launch W to kind of go beyond the threshold of where the tightly controlled, individually driven brands wanted to go. So, you know, small companies, founder driven, didn't necessarily want to go to that, I don't want to call them second tier cities per se, but outside the original global capitals. I think what you're seeing now is really a awakening of other cities where there is wealth and there is social engagement and there is creativity and there is a audience that travels to and indigenous to the local population, where boutique hotels, or what we view as lifestyle hotels, are really emerging. And it's happening everywhere from, let's say, the secondary cities around the global capital. So, you know, Brooklyn was an incredible example in New York City. 20 years ago, you would say that, you know, one of the premier boutique hotels in New York City would be in Williamsburg. Probably would have looked at me like I was crazy.
Right.
But, you know, today it's assumed, right? And in certain ways, it has more credibility than in certain parts of Manhattan because of the culture and what's going on in the local community. You're seeing it in Minneapolis, you're seeing it in Milwaukee, you're seeing it in Pittsburgh, you're seeing it certainly in Washington, D.C. and Chicago for years already. So I think what's happened is, you know, there was a moment in time where the tipping point happened, where maybe it was Ian Traeger per se, that this worked, this was financeable, this is doable, and you don't only have to be a 22-year-old artist to stay here. And once those assumptions were made, it just started to grow. Now, we're still probably only at 2% of the overall room inventory market sector, which would probably be considered boutique. So there's a lot of room for growth. And I think what the next wave is happening, and you're seeing it with Edition, and you've certainly seen it with W, is that the larger chains are basically, it's not so much that they're trying to be boutique or lifestyle. They are, like in many other industries, learning from the smaller ateliers. Like in fashion, a small fashion house will create the precedent. A larger company will then create the mass production, right? So H&M is a very different version of mass affordable fashion than, you know, its predecessor was. It's much more stylish. It's taking cues from the really cutting edge of the fashion industry. I think the same thing's happening with the flags. And I think it's happening not only on the luxury sector, like where Edition is, but you're going to see it throughout. So what they're doing is they're reinterpreting what the standard is. So Westin, Hilton, W, you know, they're basically saying, this is normal. This is what we think most of our guests in this new demographic shift is happening. And then it's up to us as the boutique and individual operators and as the brand visionaries to then keep moving the ball forward. So where are we going to go next? What are we going to do next? What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like?
Well, Dan, let's talk about something that's hot on the lips of everybody in our industry, just along the lines of what Jason was talking about. Now we are seeing the big brands kind of encroaching into the boutique side of the business. There's been some announcements recently about things like that.
Well, I think to, you know, Jason's point, you know, the big brands are clearly getting into the space, and we just had an announcement from Hilton that Curio, is that the new name?
Yeah, the new name, right.
Marriott has Autograph. I think what we're seeing is sort of a melding between, you know, frankly, the brands and the perception of boutique independence. You know, at the end of the day, it's frankly, it's all about making money, and I truly believe that location and price are really the drivers, because, you know, really at every price point, everything's kind of turning hip and boutique, if you think about it.
Right. But Dan, do you think that the big brands can pull off the boutique concept? You heard Horst talking about service is everything. A boutique that's run by an individual can do that. Can the brands do that?
Horst is a legend, and I really admire his passion for service. It's interesting, if you look at the airline business,
Right.
they've finally figured out how to make money, and what happened to their service? There is none.
Right.
And people still,
So there's a trade-off.
well, I think the hotel business maybe needs to revisit that whole service concept, and
So the whole world's turning limited service, select service?
I wasn't saying that. I think there are opportunities to nickel and dime travelers no different than the airlines do. I mean, you can cancel or change an airline flight for a fee, right? With a hotel,
No fee.
There's no fee, right? I mean,
Do you see that becoming something prevalent in the future on the hotel side?
I think the hotel business needs to sort of organize similar to the airline industry. The airline industry, to me, is really the beacon for figuring out yield management of a perishable commodity, which are hotel rooms. And I think they have figured it out. And it has been at the expense of service, and I'm not condoning that, but the fact remains, it depends on what your objective is. If you're looking to, have a boutique hotel and there is, passion and possibly some ego involved and economics are secondary,
Right.
that's one situation. If economics are primary, it's a different situation.
So a couple of things, just jumping back to our original discussion about location theory. If I'm listening to you guys right, there is now potential for successful boutique hotels moving towards some secondary cities and maybe off of the Park Avenue. Potential now you can go onto a side street. If you've got a good enough name as a boutique, people will find you. You don't need to be at Main and Main.
Well, you look at when Ian Schrager developed the Hudson Hotel.
Right.
On 58th and I think it's
Way west.
8th or 8th
Right.
Avenue. People, when he first announced that deal, people thought he had gone crazy.
That was almost New Jersey when he announced that deal.
And really the market has evolved around him, so it was a very insightful location in retrospect. So again, if the hotel is great, it becomes a destination hotel, and people will travel to it.
People
In that vein, it's kind of interesting if you think back long enough, and if you're familiar with New York 30, 40 years ago, I remember when the Marriott Marquis was proposed, and
Everybody scoffed at
it
it.
was like that was in the heart of a combat zone.
Right, right.
Which you can see in the design of it. I mean, they've worked for years to try to open the hotel up now, because when they built it, it was basically a fortress.
Correct.
Because they were trying to make it hard to figure out how to get in there. Bobby, I want to throw in the locational thing and going to secondary markets. I think it's interesting to look, particularly for boutique hotels, that it really follows the residential trends. I mean, all the neighborhoods we've mentioned, Brooklyn certainly. I have a son who lives there now and would rather live there than Manhattan, so that required some adjusting for me. But if you look at all the places people are going to now, it's places where it follows that trend of people wanting the urban experience, moving to places that no one would have possibly wanted to live. I was in LA last week looking, but one of the things I've learned is forget everything I think I know about neighborhoods. In New York, the new model should be anywhere that any of my ancestors worked hard to leave is where you want to invest now. That's the model. And I was in LA looking in the Arts District, and I mean, I just have to say, with all respect to LA and the Arts District, I just barely got used to downtown having come back. And you go to the Arts District and looks somewhat like you don't want to get out of your car. And meanwhile, then you go around the corner and there's an Earth Cafe. And so I think it's the whole urban trend and boutique hotels, frankly, fit in better. It's easier to go do a small hotel in those areas than to go build an 800-room hotel. They probably will eventually. I mean, I remember, Mark, I don't remember if you were at Sonnenblick. Were you there when the Marriott in Brooklyn was done? Were you, yeah, so I mean, that was a deal. So it was virtually impossible to convince lenders that there should even be a Marriott in Brooklyn, because they were thinking, what are you going to do with a hotel in Brooklyn? And it was only when they were convinced that there'd be a big kosher catering business that they did it. And now that looks like the biggest no-brainer, and I think it's a huge
I'll take it a step
moneymaker.
further. When we worked on that deal, I forget what decade that was. I think it was
A long time ago.
probably the
We both
mid-'90s.
had hair.
90s, right. Right.
There was another major brand who was supposed to be managing that hotel, and
No names.
I wasn't going to mention the name, but and at the last minute they elected to terminate the contract, and Marriott picked it up because Hilton just wasn't sure that
it
was
would
going to work. So it's just amazing how that area has developed and evolved just over a very short period of time.
Well, let me ask you guys one more last question on location theory, and then we'll kind of jump on to the next one. Will the boutique business get to the point where a boutique can happen in a suburban location? Everybody's talked about urban stuff. You talked about LA, you talked about, the 60 hotels and things like that, Baccarat. Is there such thing as a long-term viable business for boutiques in a suburban location?
I reside in Great Neck, and
Right.
there's a boutique hotel in town that's always filled, the Inn at Great Neck.
Right. So it's
In
it's
Roslyn,
there.
you have the Claremont Hotel. I mean,
We're selling that hotel in Long Beach now, the Allegra, which is a boutique. I think it depends how you define suburb. Great Neck are slightly denser. I don't think it's going to work in suburban sprawl somewhere Ohio, but I think in the more urbane suburban areas it could work. But I think part of this, which I know we discussed earlier today, is really when we talk about boutique hotels, and one of the things I was curious about when I got invited onto the panel is how we're defining boutique hotels.
Right.
Because it does seem to cover a huge swath of...
Well, you all saw Jan's discussion was, let's use 200 rooms as our kind of magic number. I have traditionally disagreed with one thing that he talked about, which was the fact of, could a major brand also be a boutique? But again, tied into Dan's comment about the new Hilton thing where the brands are trying to be boutiques, maybe that's a passé concept now.
Well, it's probably a question of what the guest thinks it is.
Right,
I mean,
right.
when Marriott went in, they were, I think, very smart to bring Ian in because they knew that they weren't going to...
Themselves.
Simplifying, but they weren't going to figure it out as well as he could.
Right.
But so it's whether the guest, it's whether a guest is going to stay at a boutique because it's Marriott, probably not.
Right.
Or if you get enough of a differentiation that they're not even, sort of like Ritz-Carlton, most guests haven't the slightest idea it has anything to do with Marriott, I would say. I mean, some do, but.
Right, Mark, you were going to...
Yeah, I was actually going to make the same point, that Marriott really understood that their foray into boutique lodging may not be as successful if they didn't have a innovator who was proven already in that sector. So to their credit, they
Hence
they
bringing
realized that.
Ian in with them, right.
I think you're seeing boutique at, frankly, all the chain scales. I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to say it. Indigo, which is an IHG brand, I mean,
Right.
I don't know if they could perceive it as a boutique brand. It's got the hardwood floors. It's kind of got that.
Can boutique be moderately priced, or does it need to be upper end?
I think clearly folks that stay at an Indigo feel like they're in a cool, hip hotel at the price point that they can afford.
But Dan, at that price point, can you deliver the service that's been discussed here?
I'm the wrong guy to talk about service. That's Jason.
Well, I think it's a different interpretation of service, right? The value orientation, the idea of where does boutique fall, it's almost going to become an obsolete term soon, boutique, because what it is it's the hotel culture is changing. It's becoming more design savvy. It's becoming more progressive in their F&B engagement thinking, and therefore the norm is going to be different, right? So our individual sub-brands or boutique brands today, or individual hotels that are considered boutique, will be just that. They will be, and they'll have their own identity, and that's fine, right? So the segmentation is going to start to blur more and more. Interestingly, when the boutique world started, it was a lower price point, right? It was meant to be younger people,
Right.
alternative-looking places,
Smaller rooms.
There was there were a couple hotels in New York City. There was a little hotel called the Franklin on the Upper East Side that had rooms this big, right? And it had an
Still there in the room.
still there, right?
Right.
And people thought it was the most amazing thing they had ever seen. And all of these interesting people would stay there, and they thought, and in a certain way, it was, because it was one of the first hotels in New York City to say, you know what, I'm going to give you a tiny room. I'm going to do a completely impractical but very nice-looking design.
Right.
I'm going to fill it with special rates for people that are either from modeling agencies or creative agencies, whatever. And I'm going to create a vibe, and it's in a not very cool area, right? It's in a very established, but yet people got so fascinated by this, it helped start the trend. So the idea of cheaper and value and appealing to what today would be the millennials
Right.
is really the direction that the boutique world is going, right? So that's where the new innovation is going to be. And I think when you talk about service in relation to that, they have a different expectation of service. It's really interesting what Horst said when he was up here. And it reminded me of, it holds true, right? I mean, I agree with all of that. The only thing is Gen Y just wants to be left alone a little bit, except for what they actually need.
Right.
Right? So they want great Wi-Fi. They want the ability to connect and be social. They don't really need turn down, and they don't really need chocolates by the pillow, and they don't really need room service 24/7. They'd rather have a gourmet grab and go,
Downstairs.
a great bar, an affordably priced restaurant where they and their friends can kind of hang out and congregate and meet in an informal setting. And that's what they prefer. And by the way, they don't need large room size. They want innovative design, they want smart design, and they want something that appeals to their sensibilities. But it doesn't have to be what we perceive as, the 18 by 14 cube, the 22 by 14 cube, and
Right.
just doesn't need to be that. And I think that's where the real interesting direction is going to go.
Dan?
I interpret a lot of what Jason is saying, which I agree with, by the way, as if you look back over time when the brands did what they did, they sort of made the hotel business a commodity, right? And I think what we're starting to see now is that boutique hotels are becoming commoditized at different price points.
And what Jason said made me, it's funny, I was talking about the Franklin Hotel at dinner last night with someone who's probably here, but I can't see these lights. But, and one of the interesting things about boutique hotels you reminded me of is how a lot of hotels can more easily be repurposed into boutique hotels. When I was growing up, and I told them this last night, the Franklin Hotel existed for husbands who were thrown out by their wives and needed somewhere to stay. That was the next evolution. You couldn't make the Franklin into anything that was grand, but you could make it into a boutique hotel, and it obviously worked.
Actually, before that, 86th Street was populated with hookers and
Right. that's
And
right.
German
That
restaurants,
place.
hookers and
And
German
German
restaurants.
restaurants.
Yes.
Hey, Karrie, let's jump in. Jason made reference to design, so let's kind of jump into that as our next step in the evolution of the boutique. When Getty's is called in to design and work the interiors on a new boutique project, are you doing the design, interior specifically, tied to the neighborhood that it's in, or are you coming in and saying, no, we're trying to make a statement with our design, here's what it is? Where do you go in terms of choosing your interior palettes and things?
Sure, and I think it sort of ties into what everybody's saying. For us, what we've seen in the shift as far as our process goes, we really work closely with our brand design team or another brand design team to really create the story. So for us, it doesn't start with the palette or doesn't start with that. It starts with creating that experience and what are people coming to expect. We're not trying to be all things to all people at the property that we're designing, so trying to focus on what are the demographics and the psychographics of what people are wanting to see. A couple of projects that we've just done recently, all of them are in Chicago. They're very different. They're probably within a 10-block radius of each other, and each one is very uniquely different. The aesthetics, yes, but also the story. The Mile North, which we just did, it just opened about 9 months ago, was very much created from the beginning about a story of Ferris and Jack, which were based on inventions that happened in Chicago, the Ferris wheel and Cracker Jack. So it was all around the World's Fair and kind of trying to rebrand that lobby so that it becomes a social hub and having an actual marketplace and an open space and that sort of thing right around the hospital area so that locals and hotel guests alike could stay and kind of migrate through that space. And then you go probably 5 blocks west and you're at the Hotel Felix, which is a quieter portion of the River North neighborhood, and it was very focused on sustainability and the millennials and guests that are focused on coming to Chicago that want to stay somewhere that's LEED certified.
And how many rooms are those, Karrie? What size are
I'm
we talking
happy
about?
to say they're around the 200 range, give or take. So
Okay, plus or
whether it's
minus.
215 or just under, they're all with 199. Yeah.
Right.
And then, just further down the street, we've got the Godfrey, and that one was very much about actually creating a space for people to want to come to, which is our roof deck that opens. So it's basically the story of here's our roof deck. It's a great place to be able to be seen. And then there happens to be rooms as well. So a great locations, quieter neighborhood, but really completely different experiences at each different one of them. So for us, it starts with, And I think specifically for boutique, whether it's these unbranded properties that we've done or some of the things that we've done with Autograph, and that's really creating the story and having something that people are going to want to experience and learn about and be a part of.
Well, let's jump to our next part of the discussion. We talked about location, we talked about design. Dan, I'm going to drop one into your sector for a second. It's very easy when you're talking about the big box hotels to be able to project feasibility. You know, the Hilton does this, the Marriott does that. With boutique projects, they are very individualized, sometimes very unique. In Mark's example, for example, here's a Baccarat hotel, doesn't exist anywhere else in the United States. When somebody calls you up to talk about feasibility, projections, appraisals, all our lenders need appraisals. But there's, yeah, thank God, keeps you in business. But there's no comp for you to look at. How do you go about deciding, oh, well, here's where I think the room rates are going to be, when there's nothing to look at as an existing comp or benchmark?
I'm not sure if I necessarily agree that there, you know, for the example of what Mark's doing, that there are no comparables. I mean, agreed, there is
scheduled. So it really is a fully integrated building, and we believe that really is the future of luxury hotel development.
I love it.
What's really interesting about that is the future of luxury hotel development. If you look at New York history, places like the Ritz Tower on 57th Street, even the Carlyle, they were all, a lot of them were built as residential buildings that provided all this. They had private dining rooms. They had made the Hampshire House. I mean, there's a zillion of them in the city, but that was like a model from the 20s before the stock market crash and the Depression that kind of went away, and now you're bringing it back. And
well, yeah, what's interesting is that some of our peers, 432 Park, which is a very luxurious residential building, they chose to not have a hotel in their building, but they're trying to replicate hotel-like services. So they're putting in exclusive dining room, you know, within the building. They're going to have concierge services. But it's not going to be like living in a hotel, which many of our buyers really cherish,
right?
Because they have the ability to be private and exclusive in their residential tower, but can also step into a very social environment. So it's not just about services, you know, providing services, but it's also about being able to live in a luxury hotel when you so choose, and being able to be part of that social experience.
John, let's now take the next step. We've talked about feasibility. Mark's thrown some numbers out. You've been very active in the boutique hotel finance world. And let's focus for a second on more the construction side as opposed to refis of existing. Just stick with construction on the debt and equity side. What kind of issues do you run into when you're out putting together construction financing on a boutique project that may differ from some of the big branded deals?
I think I want to back up for 1 second. One of the things we mentioned Horst, who I thought was excellent. I'm trying to figure out if I'm yet old enough to say whatever I'm thinking. So, but I'm going to wait a little bit longer.
You don't have enough gray hair.
On the boutique hotel side with construction, I'd say the main issue, which we also run into with refinancing, is depending on what type of boutique it is. If it's part of Marriott, it's one thing. But if it's really an independent kind of small group, it really comes down from the financing side to getting lenders comfortable that this particular group is going to be able to deliver. And I think it's changed dramatically. It used to be very challenging. It's less so now because in markets, let me back up. In markets where you can't finance anything, you can't finance anything. So markets like New York where you can finance construction, you know, the boutique differential would be just getting lenders comfortable and investors comfortable that it's the right brand that will be able to deliver. And I think we've seen enough examples in New York now, and the one I keep thinking of is this group Firmdale out of London that did the hotel on Crosby Street. Now, I remember when they first showed up, because we met with them, and a lot of people, you know, there was a little bit of this, who are they, what are they going to do? You know, meanwhile, they've built a hotel that's a huge success. I mean, for a lot of people, it's their favorite hotel in New York. It's making a lot of money, great ADR, great occupancy. And so I think that's something that shifted both in reality and also in the lender's perception, which is sometimes more important, that you don't need to have Marriott. I mean, they like having the big brands, but you can now at least get it done. And it used to be much more difficult. There was always this debate, which probably other people here will talk about, whether you should brand a hotel or not brand a hotel, and what were the advantages and the disadvantages. And one of the reasons a lot of people did brand them was, one, for what you got from the brands on the operations side, but two was it made it more financeable because it was very hard to finance, certainly a larger hotel that was backed or run by a small group.
Right.
And I think that's changed. I think it's become much.
Yeah, that's just to follow up on John's point, it's a little
Right.
off topic, but that the Crosby Street Hotel and there's another hotel called the Greenwich Hotel
Right.
in Tribeca. Those are two hotels. Traditionally in New York, the common belief was that you couldn't get exceptionally high rates, sort of south of Midtown. And that's really where all the luxury hotels historically have been built. But those two hotels were getting rates, in excess of $800 a night. So to our point earlier, it's just a question of quality and really reputation and service that drives the guest experience and ultimately the rate.
Right, so now the lending community is getting a little bit more accustomed to seeing successful boutiques, and once that happens, they loosen up their
Right,
lending
well, it's
a
also a
little bit.
function of where you are in the finance cycle. So, for
Right.
example, in 2011, I think it would have been much more difficult to finance a boutique hotel. Fast forward 3 years to 2014, lenders are getting a lot more sophisticated, a lot more comfortable with some of the new boutique strategies.
Well, let's then jump more into operations of the boutique hotel and profitability and things like that. And Jason, I'm going to start with you. You guys are operating pretty much coast to coast on the high end. For those of you that don't know, Jason started with the Thompson, which both in New York and in LA are fabulous projects. His new brand is called 60, which is from 60 Thompson, essentially. Right now, how do you see the boutique industry in terms of operations? Is it margins are much better because you're small and lean and mean, or are your margins the same as kind of the big brands?
I think it's all about approach, right? So we should be lean and mean and be
Right.
able to, and where newer projects with less experience, boutique operators get into trouble, they start to layer on departmental expenses that normally traditionally are not a boutique thing, right? So for instance, when the Schrager model originally started, you always outsourced or collaborated with your food and beverage department.
Right.
Right? And it worked well for years. And you closely related, it wasn't a true lease, but it was a third-party operator that ended up having their own infrastructure, their own team.
Right.
And the margins on food and beverage are significantly less than they are on rooms. So
Right.
the way you're going to keep that tight is either by modeling it in a similar concept, or you have to have enough confidence that the volume you're creating in your food and beverage department is sufficient to balance that out. Now, this is where a lot of people get into trouble, right? Because they believe, and that if you look at the dollar per foot revenue generated in certain hotels, it's astronomical,
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to translate to every hotel, right? So just as Baccarat and Mark's project is generating $4,000 a foot, I assure you that there is a condo developer pitching a project on 22nd and 2nd that is using that as a comp of some kind and saying, well, if you can get 4, I can get 35, and I'm going to be okay.
Right.
And it doesn't work that way, right? So I think often the tail starts to wag the dog a little bit, and people see large square footages that they end up putting a lot of money building out in a huge operational structure, and that's when the margins go haywire. So if you stick to the traditional sort of model of limit your exposure, joint tasks between a lot of managerial departments, which is another big thing, right? So being able to kind of be a slashy as a general manager, sales director, as a front office manager, housekeeping director, helps create not only efficiency in your cost structure, but also in your execution. Everybody does their job a bit better. And I think you're also using your marketing skills and your marketing budgets differently, right? We don't have, a boutique brand like mine versus a true flag brand is probably going to run at least half as expensive when you add up all the fees, all the different infrastructure costs, all the different reservation costs, and maybe, hopefully, perform better, right? So when you're talking about a 200-room hotel, that could be the difference between success and failure financially. So I think to a degree there's a hybrid model where today financial institutions want to see maybe not individual operators, but they want to see boutique brands or operators of several hotels that have a proven track record and that can effectively operate within certain markets and don't need the flag per se, and realize that the profitability is probably better, particularly with some of the union affiliations in the major cities of the flag.
Because you don't have the union affiliations as a boutique, you're under the radar, is that why?
I'm going to be silent to that.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I will tell you that
That's how I remain under the radar.
as a small portion of the development team for a couple of the hotels that we have in Chicago, we were actually approached by some of the larger brands to actually brand that particular hotel under their flag. And because of sort of the service that we provide and to your point, the smaller operations team and the efficiencies of that, they've actually been able to maintain incredibly high occupancies and rates, and they turned the flag down because they were able to stay unbranded and be able to focus on the three of those hotels kind of managing together.
I'm amazed that there's no one in the audience from a brand who hasn't leapt out of their seat, because I've heard this argument, yeah.
Right.
But,
We work with branded and unbranded, but
I'm not
this
saying I
is
disagree with you, I'm
a
just saying
opportunity,
it,
yeah.
go back and forth.
Dan?
I think Jason actually brought up an interesting point that I think really should just be dwelled upon a little bit further in terms of when the original boutique hotel came out and Schrager and Rubel looked outside for food and beverage expertise. So prior to that, the notion of eating in a hotel was not a positive one, and frankly, from an economic perspective, hoteliers never made money in the food and beverage space.
Right.
But once that model changed, and the notion of getting celebrity chefs or an outside operator,
Randy Gerber or something.
Exactly. I think what it really kind of proved was that the hotel business, hoteliers should kind of stick to their knitting and deal with the guest rooms and let food and beverage experts deal with the restaurant side of the business. So essentially, I think that was an inflection point where previously food and beverage was a losing proposition and frankly a necessary evil that a full-service hotel had to have. What are the cost expense leader, whatever.
Loss leader.
Loss leader. Thank you.
Right.
That's the term.
It's good you don't know that term.
And turned it around to At this point, there's no reason why food and beverage in a hotel, it doesn't matter whether it's boutique or not, there's no reason why it should be a loss leader.
Historically, the brands referred to food and beverage as an amenity, and it really wasn't viewed as a profit center, and the industry really has evolved.
Right.
It also does, in places like New York, not to use the word union again, but you'll see a lot of hotels when they're planned, they actually lease the restaurants out completely, get it, because there are different issues that you get around via that. And I do think the food and beverage side of boutique hotels is really very different than in a lot of hotels. It's often, everyone who saw the Standard when we had the cover bid on the Standard deal that just happened, but if you looked at those numbers, it was really a restaurant operation with hotel rooms. The food and beverage numbers were just so shockingly unbelievable. I guess it proves when we're generalizing here that you can always find the exception, and that was one. But I do think the food and beverage side of boutique hotels is often very different than everything else we're talking about, and a big driver of what happens, rooftop bars and that sort of thing.
Listen, I want to take this opportunity to thank our panel. We've kind of run out of time here. I want to make sure to our guests here in the audience, the panel is going to make themselves available afterwards if any of you want to come up and talk to them. But this has been very enlightening, top to bottom, on the status of the boutique hotel industry. And I just want to thank our panel very much.